Okay, are we ready?
Glad to see you. Yeah.
Yeah, nice to see you too, Dick. And everybody, I have Alan Bell here with me, who is the supervising planner that's overseeing the housing element preparation. And I think Dan Clemon may be on too. We have till about 12, I have till about 12:50 that I can meet, and then Alan said he could stay till 1 if there were still questions. I don't know what your agenda is or how long it is and how many items you've got.
All right, we usually go to 1:30. We try to be firm about that as the end time, and we've got the issue of this Carpinteria development that a lot of people are concerned about as well. But we do need to talk about this housing element because it's right in the middle of the public comment period.
Correct.
Go ahead.
Correct. Yeah. So let me just, I don't know how much background information you need, but that every jurisdiction in the state of California is required to prepare a housing element every 8 years. And so we are we just are wrapping up the 5th cycle of our housing element, and this is now the 6th cycle of it. And so the process begins with the state providing numbers to our region and housing numbers that need to be met. And then our Santa Barbara Association of Government then divides those numbers up based on things like jobs, housing balance, cost burden, and other factors. And they make a recommendation to that body, and then that body approves the numbers. So in this case, the county of Santa Barbara, the unincorporated area was assigned a rather large number, about 8 times larger than we had the last cycle. And also for the first time, we were required to separate housing units for the North County and the South County. And that had to do with the housing element needing to be consistent with our sustainability planning effort that had been undertaken by SBCAN. But in the North County, we were assigned 1,522 new housing units. And in the South County, it was 4,142. So that's 5,664 units assigned just to the unincorporated area. The cities also received numbers. Then Goleta, City of Goleta was around 2,000, City of Santa Barbara's 8,000. And in this cycle in particular, and you may have noticed this, the state is getting more and more, I would say, they're applying more and more pressure to local jurisdictions to actually construct housing because what they deem to be a statewide housing crisis. And they have been passing law after law, making it easier for housing development to occur, particularly in the low and very low income categories. So this cycle, the standards for our housing element have been substantially higher than they were in the past, and actually verifying with the state that the housing numbers that we are saying we're going to satisfy are actually viable sites. So there's been a lot of work put into a land inventory and then identifying viable sites for the board to consider. What I do want to say is that a new thing is this public comment period. That hasn't been part of our housing element process in the past. And the state is mandating a 30-day comment period, which I think is great because it increases the transparency of the process and allows the public time to digest it and then provide meaningful comment. So just in terms of our process, so we are at the point where we're in that public comment period, as Dick mentioned, and that closes March 1st. I know that then we will be submitting it to the state mid-March for their review of our document. And we have been working hard to try and get through that process. I think it's real important for everybody on this call to know that this is a 2-step process. We're going to move forward with the adoption of the housing element, which really is the needs assessment, a list of sites that will be considered for rezones, and programs, policies, and programs. That's what's in this housing element that will be moving forward to the board first. We're required to put a list of sites in there as part of our land inventory for HCD to see that could potentially be rezoned. But the rezones will happen after the adoption of the actual housing element, and that will be later in this year. So it's a two-step process. I think that's a really important piece of information. The other thing I wanted to share was we have a hearing coming up on Tuesday, and that hearing is to work with the board on the goals, policies, and programs. So chapter 5 of the housing element. And so that, we encourage people to participate, and you can participate virtually. That meeting's in Santa Maria, but you can come to the Santa Barbara hearing room if you want to participate that way, or you can just participate from your office or your home. The other thing I wanted to make it clear was, and we get a lot of questions about this, we have a proposed more sites than the RENA allocation requires. And that is there's two reasons for that. The first one is, and state HCD recommends this because of a new law that they passed, that you provide a 15% buffer above and beyond your RENA allocation. And that's because the new law is called a no net loss. And what that means is if you identify sites in your housing element, you rezone them, and they develop at numbers that are less than you projected in your housing element, and your available land is short on meeting your RENA number mid-cycle, they will make you come back and do more rezones. So we would, it's recommended in most jurisdictions are including this buffer. Our biggest challenge is meeting our very low and low income categories. That's our biggest challenge. We meet above moderate or what's considered market, but moderate, low, and very low are very hard to meet. So, and the other reason why we have more sites is beyond the 15% is so that the Board of Supervisors will have an opportunity to make choices about those sites when we get to hearings on the rezones. They need to have the flexibility to say this site and not that site. I would like Alan, and I've seen some of the questions coming through, I would like Alan to talk a little bit about what we did as part of our land inventory analysis and what the kind of analysis we did of all the sites across the county and the types of properties we looked at, and a little bit about what the state's requirement is for them to sign off on those sites as counting towards your RENA. So Alan, could you talk a little bit about that, and then we can move to some of the questions?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The way staff began the process is we went through and did what we call a sites inventory for the entire unincorporated county. And that's really a process where we go by and we identify as a first step vacant properties, and we look at those properties and consider what could be developed. That is the number of housing units we could recognize through those properties under existing zoning. And then we take those numbers and then we compare it to our RENA. We also look at sites that are non-vacant. That is, sites that are underdeveloped, offer an opportunity otherwise for accommodating residential development, such as things like shopping centers, where there may be just commercial uses on the site, but under a rezone or under current zoning, we could accommodate mixed use, which would be commercial and residential. So then we could factor those into the equation. And we also go through and then begin looking at the sites that might be suitable for higher density development than what's currently allowed. And one of the challenges we face in the South Coast is that we have so many units that we have to accommodate in the unincorporated county. Our current zoning generally tops out at about 20 units per acre. And what we were hearing from developers and what we've seen is that we can accommodate higher density development. And by doing so, we can make the best use out of the land that we have available. And that then helps us maintain open space and avoid going out into urban, that is transitioning from an urban area where we've focused on our sites and trying to avoid going into rural areas. So as part of our inventory, we also went through and looked very carefully at different categories of property. So for example, we did look at all the shopping centers and we're proposing to rezone a number of shopping centers to allow mixed use on those sites. We looked at county-owned property. We looked at church-owned property. We looked at school-owned property. So we took a very, very comprehensive look at what was available. And then as Lisa was indicating, we do have a buffer on top of our arena. So as we went through and looked at properties that could be rezoned, we looked at what could be accommodated under the existing zoning ordinances. We kind of added those into the mix until we got to a point where we could exceed the number of parcels and number of units necessary to accommodate our arena and provide some flexibility. One of the challenges we have, and one of the changes in state law that occurs when we come to non-vacant sites, the state has put a very high standard for including those and counting potential units from those sites toward our arena. What's happened in the past, some jurisdictions would identify a developed site and say, well, it's going to redevelop within our upcoming housing cycle, and they would count units from it. But the state found that many of those sites weren't developing. So the standard for including those sites is very high. In our situation, we have to provide substantial evidence to show that a non-vacant site will actually redevelop and units will be constructed within our upcoming planning cycle, which goes from 2023 to 2031. So in those cases, we've been working very closely with property owners to ensure that we can actually realize that development in the upcoming cycle. And in some cases, property owners have told us that they can do it, and in some cases, they can't. So if they can't, then what we kind of do is put those on a list. They may be potential sites for our next housing element that begins in 2032. So that's kind of an overview. We do have in the draft housing element, chapter 4 has kind of a summary of what steps we took. And then there's an appendix, which is Appendix E, that goes into more detail about what I've just discussed. It's more step by step and provides all the numbers, what we can accommodate under existing zoning, what the buffer is, what the arena is, and then what our surplus and in some cases shortfalls are at various stages in the calculations. Thank you.
The other thing I think that would be very important for your group to be reading is chapter 4, which gives us more information on, wait, is chapter 4 our needs assessment?
Chapter 3.
Chapter 3, sorry. Chapter 3 is the needs assessment. And that will give you a good picture of how severe the problem is in terms of affordability in our community. And I think that's a really important aspect of this process that people need to be aware of, and why, and this is why the state is pushing on this. I mean, the state has grown incredibly impatient and has created several consequences for not meeting their requirements and also not adopting on time. And as you can see, probably in the newspaper, most jurisdictions have been late because the process has gotten so complicated. But there are pretty severe consequences if the state doesn't find you to be in compliance, which is why we are working to try and develop a housing element that the state will accept while balancing all the other needs and objectives of our community and our comprehensive plans. So that's just a really important factor, the need and then the state's the state's approach, what they're doing with different jurisdictions. But I think, you know, with that, I'm happy to turn to some of the questions I see they're sort of stacking up here.
So have you had a chance to look at those? Because some of them are very well informed, because the League of Women Voters is very well informed, the
They
team
are,
there on housing. And
they are.
I don't know if you can absorb those questions, but they're right on point. So
Yeah, sure. So we have a first question from Diane Black. And she's asked about whether or not some of the sites we have selected could be required to provide certain percentages of low, moderate, and above moderate housing. And so she also talks a little bit about funding in her comments. And then we will talk about the county-owned sites. I mean, Alan can talk a little bit more about that. But so just to start with this question, this would be essentially like a change to our inclusionary housing ordinance. And it's something we've talked about internally. We don't have that as a program right now, updating it with those specific objectives. We will be updating the inclusionary housing ordinance. So if you're interested in seeing something like that, please make sure you put that in writing. The challenge with those percentages is, and I have done some work with some of our local developers to look at what is economically viable. The challenge with some of those percentages is unless there's subsidy for them, they probably won't be built. So that's something we have to weigh when we're coming up with programs, because the state looks at our programs and makes comments on whether or not we are creating governmental constraints that prevent the development of housing. So I think what we want to do is study some of these things. Like if you have read the chapter on programs, we are looking at potentially creating a county density bonus program that stimulates the development of moderate housing, because there is absolutely no subsidy for that. We know that our nonprofits and our housing authority do a good job of providing the very low and low, but those are heavily subsidized. And as Diane points out, you know, we lost redevelopment money, which has been a huge impact to their organizations and their ability to produce housing. And we're always looking for a more consistent source of funding for them and an increase in funding. So that would be really beneficial, and anything the league can do in that vein would be terrific.
So let me point out that the city, Santa Barbara, has created a affordable housing fund and already allocated several $1 million to it. That's what I think the league people are referring to. That was in the city housing element as an idea, and the council pretty quickly established this. And I think they're wondering, I'm reading their minds, can this be included in the county housing element? A concept like creating a housing fund. I won't call it a trust fund because there are other organizations already called Housing Trust Fund, but a housing fund that can be the revenue stream that would subsidize. And along with that, we already have some precedent of the housing authority, county housing authority, partnering with developers. Maybe I'm wondering if that kind of idea can be inscribed in the housing element as a key part of going forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I see Diane has her hand up.
Well,
Yeah,
I just wanted to clarify, we're still asking the city of Santa Barbara to come up with a consistent source of funding, like an additional tax of TOT or some other consistent source. I mean, we're happy that they set aside that finite set of dollars, but it's going to run out, and we want to make sure that they have money to provide the nonprofits with the resources they need to build housing at the rates we need.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, no, that would be an excellent comment. I'm sure the league is going to write a letter. So that would be great to include that in there. And we're happy to add something like that. I mean,
well, we now even have a coalition of an SBCAN cause. Several unions are involved. Planned Parenthood around these issues and looking at potentially ballot initiative in 2024 for the city to raise the TOT for affordable housing. So this is going forward, and it would be very helpful and important to have in the housing element advocacy of some kind of instrumentality, some kind of framework for the local county level subsidy of housing.
Yeah, it's desperately needed. There's no question about that. Just to get to Diane's second part of her question about county sites, I mean, I know Alan addressed it in part of his comments, but we did look at county-owned sites. We spent a good amount of time with General Services. And Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, if those are identified as yellow on our map or not.
Some are those that looked like they had some potential for development that we examined further, but we looked at all sites, vacant and non-vacant, and determined whether or not they were suitable. We did identify some that we are proposing to contribute to our numbers. For example, at the Page Youth Center, we have actually 2 sites there. One is it's called Hollister Lofts. It's a pending project, one that's moving forward. And it deals with providing lower income housing. And we also have another site on the Page Youth Center facilities. It's the existing juvenile hall site, which the county plans to remove that building and develop workforce housing. And that would be somewhere in the area of, say, 75 or 100 units, whereas the Hollister Lofts would be somewhere around 30 or 40 units. So we did incorporate those where we found they were suitable.
Yeah, there is we continue to work with General Services to see if we can find sites. A lot of sites that they own are planned for future facilities that are county facilities. And so we're just trying to work with the board and work with General Services on figuring it out. I know the board was interested in seeing as many county-owned sites in the list as possible. And we have another meeting with General Services coming up, just to make sure we've unturned every stone,
I'd like to call it, Nadia has a very good question that would be very helpful for our organization, SBCAN. So why don't you state what it is, Nadia?
Sure, I've heard from different people that, the conversion of prime ag lands, specifically around Goleta, is, of particular concern. It's something we've opposed in the past, SBCAN, and different areas of the county. So, but obviously we see the great need for affordable housing. So I've heard people say, well, these lands are going to be guaranteed to be affordable housing. It's definitely going to be developed into affordable housing, but I'm just confused about, is there an actual mechanism that the county has to guarantee that that would happen? And if so, then that would make it a lot easier for groups like SBCAN, and I think the league also to, support the conversion of those lands, but and other housing advocates in the county, if there was that guarantee of, okay, this is a trade-off we can consider versus, is it just going to be luxury housing? What is it going to be? Yeah.
Understood. So it's kind of a complicated issue. The reality is that we have programs that require a certain percentage of land developed to be very low and moderate income right now. That's an inclusionary housing ordinance. There's also an option for developers to take advantage of the state density bonus law that is in place. And that state density bonus law requires a certain percentage of affordable in exchange for getting a greater density or also concessions. So, and then of course I mentioned that we want to create a county one that can compete with the state one that stimulates the development of moderate rate housing. We do not have anything in place that guarantees 100% of that site will be for very low or moderate income. And I think it would be, I'm not sure that we can do that, but we can certainly accept public comment on that and have council look into it. it could be prohibitive in terms of seeing development. What we like to do is make sure that our nonprofits have the ability to get access to these. And in particular, when it comes to like publicly owned lands, we have to offer publicly owned lands that might be developed to nonprofits in our housing authority first, which is a great thing. And that's kind of why you're seeing the Hollister Lofts developing for very low income, but it is tricky, and I can see why the goal would be, the desire of the community would be like, look, if that's the housing we need, we want some guarantees that it will develop at that level. And I understand that 100%. And so I've been looking at possible solutions for that. But if you provide some comments on that, we can look at that in greater detail. But again, we have to be careful not to create what they call government constraints that actually end up preventing the development of housing. So that's what we try to balance.
Lisa, we're very concerned about the UCSB housing plans not being fulfilled. And I understand those, what UCSB builds is not part of the RENA calculations. Why is that? And could that be changed?
That's they are students. And so they're
I'm
not,
talking about staff housing.
staff housing.
They have about 1,840 units promised that remain to be delivered, or a large portion of that. And there is one project in the works, but for about a third of that or less. And those were all supposed to be done within the next couple of years, and it won't be done. But why can't that kind of workforce housing, which is below market housing, be listed in the RENA calculations of the county?
I don't have an answer off the top of my head on that. I don't, Ellen, do you recall?
Yeah.
I think Dan knew about that, and I don't see him on the phone here on the call.
Yeah, basically under state housing element law and the calculation of our RENA, the university property is not included within our jurisdiction. They don't go through county permitting, for example. So the state excludes them from our jurisdiction and doesn't factor that into our calculations in terms of what might be built there. And we can't claim credit for those as a result.
Well, the county is suing the university for its failure to do this.
Yeah.
And the fact that they haven't done it adds to the very housing crisis that the RENA numbers are supposed to overcome. There's something not logical about this.
It's something maybe that needs to be discussed with SBCAG as they, and then we can work with the state on something like that. I understand. These are people that would otherwise be housed in units either in the city of Goleta or the county of Santa Barbara.
Right.
And why not have at least the two jurisdictions maybe even split that and get credit for those two things? I have a tendency to agree with that approach, but I think we would have to take that to SBCAG in the state.
All right, well, that may be a good project for us. So I think Linda Honeck.
There's a question from Mike Wondolowski. So
go ahead.
Go ahead and ask that.
Why don't you, looking at this chat, why don't you decide what you want to answer?
Yeah, sure. So Mike asked a question about the public comment period closing and then submitting on March 1st and then submitting mid-March. So the way the state law is set up is that 10 business days following the close of the public comment, the county is to consider comments and make changes to the housing element that are deemed necessary. It is not like an EIR where we prepare responses to comment. That does not happen as part of this process. So we accept the comments, we make changes that we believe to be important or necessary or relevant. And then we will attach the public letters that we receive as an appendix to our housing element. But again, it's not like an EIR where there's actually a response to comments. And our objective is to, get this thing submitted to the state as quickly as possible. That does not mean we will shortchange reviewing the comments and making any changes that we think should be made, but we will be submitting as quickly as we can in mid-March after we review them. And we're reviewing them as they come in. So, we don't have to wait until the end of the public comment period to start looking at some of these things that come in. So if you get your letters in earlier, it gives us a little bit more time to consider changes to the document. Okay, so there's another question now from Lisa Carlos. And she said, what was the process used for reviewing county-owned sites for building 100% affordable housing at the moderate to very low income level? This seems important in the light of the funding challenges. And something, hold on a second. Let's see if I can get back to this.
Maybe we could ask Lisa to just summarize what she's asked, Lisa Carlos.
Yeah.
Why don't you summarize what you're asking? Hard to read, hard to follow.
Sorry. Yes, so my question is really going back to the fact that you have thousands of units. I can't remember, it's like maybe 4,000 something units, but 68% of your total allocation for the 6th cycle in your unincorporated county area needs to be at the moderate, low, and very low income levels. And as you know, the largest producers of those are nonprofits and our public housing authorities, and they require subsidies, state, federal, and local. And if we don't have that, and I don't see, unlike the city of Santa Barbara that has a whole goal devoted to, and I think we were just discussing this, a goal devoted to a permanent funding source, both a short-term and a long-term one. You don't have anything like that as of yet in your housing element draft. So in light of not having enough capital funding, from what I can tell, looking at the budget stuff that you had in your front part of your draft, how are we going to build this? And so I immediately started to focus on your county parcels. And I know you've mentioned now a couple on the phone, but I kind of did a quick back of the envelope calculation, and it's barely 100 units, and that's not going to meet the numbers here. And I know you're talking about inclusionary, but as you pointed out, Lisa, that's a really long drawn out process with nexus studies, and there's political will. And I mean,
Yeah.
It's a dribble, right? So we're kind of in this dilemma, and I totally get that the state is pushing down on us. So without a local funding source and without giving up publicly owned land, these numbers we're never really going to make a dent in them. So I'm coming back to the county and saying, let's be realistic. Let's really go through, mine through those county lots and see where can the Board of Supervisors cough up more land and build more 100% affordable housing at the levels that we need. Otherwise, we will never crack this net of affordability. We just won't. We'll build more market rate housing, which will bring in more new people, which will raise the demand for more affordable housing.
Yeah, no, it's a conundrum.
It is.
It's a conundrum. And so, I think, as I mentioned, we continue to meet with General Services to identify sites. And as I said, when publicly owned land is made available for sale, it has to be offered up to for very low and low income development. So that's a good thing. That's a law that's in place. And we continue to work with General Services to try and identify sites for that. So what we did say is we did get 2. We have the site that was at the Hollister Lofts, and then we have the juvenile hall site. Part of our problem is that some of these county-owned parcels are designated for some future development of something else, or something has to be torn down and rebuilt in order for us to take advantage of that site. So that could be a next cycle option for us. But for now, it's not going to be available in this 8-year cycle. That's kind of some of the problems we've been running into with publicly owned land. And, we are open to working with school districts. I know that this Santa Barbara Unified sold the Tatum property, and that's going to be developed now finally. That's in Goleta. And I know, the Bailard site was a school-owned site, and that was sold, and the Housing Authority is teaming in on that. But it's a challenge. No, Lisa, I don't disagree with anything you're saying about how challenging it is to meet that need for very low and low income, particularly with the funding constraints. It's like the state is giving us these mandates, but they're not helping us fund it. So they're unfunded mandates.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's an unfunded mandate. RDA was taken away.
Yeah.
Local jurisdictions are in a real bind. I get it.
Yeah.
But
So any comments, like the comments that you had about creating some kind of long-term source of funding, whether it's the real estate transfer tax being
Right.
increased or whatever it is, please make those in writing, and then we can say we can study that and try and identify a long-term funding source. I like
it would
that
be great
idea.
to have a goal, honestly, a goal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, one other thing just to know, I mean, we did go through all the county-owned properties and we went through them one by one. Some of them have potential, but many don't. We have a lot of them, for example, that are like utility easements for drainage or transportation or things like that, odd-shaped kind of remnant parcels. But we did look thoroughly. But the other thing in terms of the affordable housing component, we have been working very closely with nonprofits. We have a number of sites in the South Coast that we're looking at rezoning or otherwise making, trying to take steps to streamline the process to bring those projects on board. So we've worked with People's Self-Help, for example, on a couple of sites. We have St. Vincent's, which we're proposing two of their properties for rezoning to up the density, because right now the density is so low, even if they built affordable units, they'd be limited. So we have covered that component as well. And we've worked with that county housing authority and some other groups. So
I can see we're kind of bearing down on my time, so I want to try and get as many questions answered as I can. So Pam Gates asked about the old Walmart property up off 135 in Santa Maria, and the city of Santa Maria is trying to annex that. We have it identified as a site that would help us meet our goals in the Santa Maria Valley in the unincorporated area. So we are working, we're going to rezone our land. And if the city takes that land, we are going to try and negotiate that they take the percent of units that site would have helped the county meet into their RENA allocation, so that they can't just, an unfortunate set of circumstances for the county is cities can propose annexations, take the land that we could develop to meet our housing need out of our jurisdiction and not take any of our allocation. That is not right. I mean, there's a serious problem with that. And so we will be working to either to make sure that gets addressed if they ultimately get LAFCO to approve it.
And there's nothing the city can do to prevent annexation, or I mean the county to prevent the city?
Yes.
I mean, we can raise issues around it, but it's LAFCO's decision. We will provide public comment on it, or agency comment on it, I should say.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. We answered Nadia's. Oh, so, Pam, you asked to define workforce housing. This is
Yes.
these terms can get kind of mixed up. So in the past, workforce housing has been defined as anybody making 120% to 200% of the area median income. But that gets confusing because isn't everybody part of our workforce?
Mhm.
Right. So what we're making a shift in our housing element policies to talk about very low, moderate, upper moderate, which is kind of how the city of Santa Barbara talks about it, as housing between, our lowest, which is below 30% of AMI, and up to 200% of AMI. So that's how we're going to try and define it, because we know that people earning between 80 to 200% of AMI still can't afford housing on the South Coast. I mean, we just had a recent study that showed 8% of our renters are in a position to buy a home in this community, and is, and not be housing cost burdened as defined by the government, which is more than 30% of your gross income being spent on housing. So there's that. Let me see. Okay, legal owners would like to view workforce housing for all income levels. So that addressed that. Yeah, in the past. Okay. Yep. All right. Gina Fisher. She likes the UCSB. Supervisor Hartman likes the UCSB concept. Linda Honickman. The state law requires local sewer and water agencies to give priority to affordable units. Is that currently happening? So Linda, you're correct. The state law does require that, and we actually have a policy in our, or program in our document that says we're to communicate with them about it. Are they doing it? I don't know. I don't know. And so our effort will be to make sure we're reaching out to them, making them aware of their requirement and talking to them about how they're implementing that.
What is the best way for people to get the whole document? And I know your website is very informative, so why don't you just let us tell us about it?
Yeah, sure. Alan, do you want to talk a little bit about our website?
Sure. Yeah, so the first thing to do would be to go into the web page that we have for the housing element update. It provides some background information on some of the things we've talked about here today, such as the RENA, the buffer, state requirements. It also has links directly to the draft housing element. To make it a little easier to use, we created one link where you can open up the entire document. But we also have links where you can just open up the housing element itself, which is a smaller file. It's easier to maneuver in. And then you also can open up the individual appendices one by one. Another tool that you should look at there, if you are trying to get just kind of a feeling about where sites are and how we categorize them, is we also have a link to an interactive map that opens up, and the map has different categories, such as rezone sites, sites that we've evaluated but maybe not proposed for rezoning, pending projects, which is a category we haven't really spoken about, but that's something we included within our units that we're applying toward the RENA. So if a project's in process, they're obtaining entitlements, we've looked at what the project description is. So the interactive map, you can click on a particular site, it'll give you the acreage, current zoning, proposed zoning, number of units. So it's a quick way to get familiar with what's happening in your particular area. So I would suggest, yes, going to the website and taking a look at that web page, and you'll find quite a bit of information there. There's also a link that you can click on if you want to be notified of upcoming public meetings, outreach events, those types of things. You can do that through the web page as well.
And those links have just been posted in the comments. So Nadia provided it and I provided it. And before I have to sign off, and I'm sorry I do.
Oh, that's fine.
I just wanted to say just a word of honor for Mickey Flax.
Thank you.
And today is a day where I really miss her.
Right.
And this is a season where I really miss her. And she was always strong, clear, logical, and a great advocate for housing. So
Thanks for that. And SBCAN's trying to carry forward the legacy of her advocacy in a lot of what we're doing now. And more mundanely, what is the timing of this discussion at the county board on Tuesday?
So yeah, Tuesday, I think we're the third item, but the first two items are not very long. So we could come up before lunch or maybe after lunch. So it'd be good to monitor. And as I said, it's at the Bailard Government Center in Santa Maria, but you can certainly participate remotely and just go onto the clerk of the board's website and sign up for a public comment.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. This is and staff, Alan, so forth. Very good presentation. And I want to stress to people, if you get nothing else out of today, that website is really well done. I'm really appreciative that you've taken account of the need for public information and public comment on this. At least from my point of view, it seemed to work pretty well when you go over there. Maybe I'm overdoing my praise, but
We'll take it. We'll take it.
All right. So
Thank you so much, Lisa.
yeah.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for your very helpful questions. We appreciate them.
And Lisa, if you want to keep track of the chat room here, because maybe there are other questions that you can respond to or take account of that are still coming in, I think. But now we want to have time for the controversy, the project in Carpinteria. who do we?
Oh, I can see this question and then I'm gonna hop
Okay,
off. There's a
okay.
question about whether or not we take into account environmental constraints that maybe present risks on properties when we look at them for rezoning. We absolutely do that. And in fact, a number of sites were excluded from the potential rezone list because of those very things. So I just want to share that, and then I'll let you guys move forward with your second discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. All right, so Valerie, or the people who are going to present for the Carpinteria project, are you out there?
We are out here, and I'm going to have Brent Little present, and I'm going to run the slide deck, if that's okay.
Okay, so do you have control over yeah, there you go. Okay, thank you.
I do. Thank you.
Great. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. I know you guys have had a active morning, and so I'm going to jump right into it. And I know a lot of people are familiar with this project and have maybe even seen this parts of this presentation before. Joining me, I think, on the call possibly is John Polanskey with the Housing Authority. I don't know if John's
I am here. It looks like I'm in witness protection though, because it shows Valerie's name for me too, but it is John. Hi, everyone. Hi, Dick.
so much.
Hi
Great
there.
job. Great job. Thank
So
you.
Brad, let me just say, Brad, you're representing tell us exactly who you're representing.
Sure. Yeah. So our development team is Redtail Multifamily Land Development and the Housing Authority of the County of Santa Barbara. John works for the Housing Authority, and I work for Redtail. And John and I together are managing this process.
Very good.
Great. Okay. So, John, I'm going to just dive right into it, and feel free to jump in, and I may defer a question or comment to you. And then, of course, after we get done, we're happy to answer any and all questions that you folks may have. So, Valerie, if you could go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this is a public-private partnership between the Housing Authority and Redtail Multifamily Land Development. And how we got to where we are now is that the property's been owned by the Carpinteria Unified School District for quite some time, and was originally planned for an elementary school site. And in fact, the city of Carpinteria proactively amended their general plan to designate this property for a school site. That was some time ago, but as we sit here today, it is still on their general plan as a potential school site. As I'm sure a lot of people know, the enrollment has changed in large part because of lack of growth in the area, and so the school district no longer needs the school site, and so they decided to sell the property. And the process for them to sell the property is called the Surplus Land Act, and essentially that process requires them to offer it to other public agencies, and housing has a first priority for the surplus land. And so with that, the Housing Authority entered into a contract to acquire the property from the school district, and then that's where we came and got involved, and now we have this public private partnership. One thing that should be noted, and John has a better history than I do as to the origination of it, and so feel free to jump in, John. But the city and the Housing Authority first had some conversations on developing a housing project on this site, and the city actually courted housing authority to build housing on this site. And ultimately, they wanted the property to be annexed in, and a variety of requirements that just couldn't be met, quite frankly. And so, so the decision, and frankly, the other challenge was the property is not within the sphere of influence of the city, so it's in the county. So we entered into negotiations with the city to craft a agreement with the city, the county, and the development team, kind of a tri-party agreement on the development on this site, and how we would handle access, and how we would handle the park, and how we would handle housing credit sharing and fees and all that. And unfortunately, the city, after nearly a year or so, backed out of that process. John, is there anything I missed out of that, or should I keep going forward?
No, there's nothing that you missed, but I know there's a comment in the chat that the property is in the city's sphere of influence. That is not correct. The city calls it a sphere of interest on their part, but that is not the same as being within the city's sphere of influence. So I just wanted to correct that comment that was in the chat, Brent. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, that is an important distinction, because to annex it into the city, for this to be a city project, it would still need to, it would not only need to go through a sphere of influence amendment, but it would need to go through a full annexation. So the fact that it is designated on the City of Carpinteria's general plan is of their doing, and really inconsequential from a public processing standpoint. So Valerie, yeah, next slide. So as I mentioned, it's roughly 169 units. The property is 7 acres. I already mentioned that this is a public-private partnership. It is in the coastal zone, and will be subject to local coastal, the local coastal plan, and an LCP amendment. Next slide. Thank you.
Brent, just really quickly,
sure.
With that 169 units, I know density has been, something of a concern of folks. We are not maximizing what would be the allowable density on the site, considering bonus density and the county's zoning, but also the state it looks at 25 units to the acre as a bare minimum for their, when they're looking at funding for affordable housing. And this is right at that spot. It's right at the state's bare minimum. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you, John. So as some of you probably know, we have a planning commission hearing coming up on the 22nd, and this is an important action to share with everyone. This hearing is a conceptual review of the project. This is only an advisory hearing. The project, the general plan amendment has been initiated. It's a self-initiation, meaning there is no further action required by the Planning Commission or the Board of Supervisors or anybody else for us to start this process. So we are going to the Planning Commission to get their early review and comments on the project. We've already appeared before the SBAR and received architectural comments on the project. So we have that. So our expectation on the 22nd is that we will be presenting this project and receiving advisory input on the design, amongst other things. almost concurrently, we're responding back to an incompleteness letter that we have received. So the process goes that we make our application to the county and they review our application, and then they provide us with an incompleteness letter saying we need to see these additional items, these additional studies. So we're in the process and we anticipate responding back to that within the next week or two to that. And then the county will review our resubmittal, and they'll either deem us complete or they will provide us another incompleteness. Once we are deemed complete, then that's when we will be able to initiate our CEQA studies. For a variety of reasons, we have taken the position to initiate an EIR on the project. So we are going to the maximum level of study on this project. And as soon as we get through that incompleteness letter, we'll be initiating that EIR. And as it says here as the last bullet point, ultimately we have a significant amount of other reviews. So in addition to other planning commission, we have the general plan amendment, which will be heard by not only the planning commission, but the board of supervisors. We have a rezone, we have a local coastal plan amendment, which of course will go to the coastal commission. We have a development plan and a lot line adjustment. So it's a fairly robust set of entitlements for the project and a lot of review. Go on to the next slide. So I'm quite confident that most of the people on this call know where the project is, but I'll show you anyway here on this slide. The property is located at the end of Bailard Road or Bailard Avenue. What a lot of people are probably aware of, but for those that are not in the area, when Bailard Avenue was originally planned, it was designed so that it would link up through the ag to the north to Casitas Pass. So consequently, you have a road right-of-way that is significantly wide and utilities that are sized in that area because there was additional development that was contemplated in that area. If I could go to the next slide. So this is where the property is located. It's directly across from the Monte Vista Park site and just above the townhomes that are immediately below us. So those townhomes are mostly, there's fourplexes below us, and then off to the lower corner, those are row townhomes, and then a little bit further are the mobile homes. Collectively, that whole area is in the city of Carpinteria, and it is designated for 20 units to the acre. It is not currently 20 units to the acre, but that's a designation. And similarly, our project is close to that. We are at 25 units to the acre. So if we could go to the next slide. So the project benefits here, and we have a number of them outlined. It's an infill site near existing multifamily in a park, and there's a lot of things that we're doing, but I'm going to boil this down to some real simple takeaways for you. The county needs housing. There is an extreme shortfall of housing at the income levels that we're talking about. This is going to be workforce housing, and this is going to be affordable housing. John, I'll let you speak a little bit about the people experiencing homelessness in that community and how they identify with Carpinteria. But we believe that that the affordable element to this project will be a great benefit to the city of Carpinteria and the residents in that area, and specifically the homelessness or the homeless that are in that area. John, do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yes, I certainly will. And as we all know, and I think I'm speaking to the choir here with SBCAN, just because somebody is experiencing homelessness doesn't mean they don't identify with a specific community. And it's usually a community in which whatever supports they're able to gather are in. And the same is true with the city of Carpinteria. They have a group of individuals experiencing homelessness that don't want to move outside the city of Carpinteria for housing. And so, you know, one of the commitments we made very early on to the city and to the county is that the folks experiencing homelessness in the city and the Carpinteria Valley would have a high priority for being housed. In addition to that, we have veterans in the area. We also have some, you know, near minimum wage workers that we house in other developments that we're looking to house here. It's 41 units. There'll be 40 units plus a resident manager. The resident manager will be a housing authority employee. We're visible within the community should any of our neighbors have any concerns. And that, you know, really is a number of support services will be provided on site. We've set aside common area space for that. And we're really looking forward to the fact that we've partnered with somebody who's committed to a rental workforce oriented project that will look at the rents in Ventura and Oxnard, where a lot of workers live and commute, as opposed to the city of Santa Barbara rents, which are significantly higher. Anyway, back to you, Brent.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Good points. So look, I know this is, we all know this is a tough project for a lot of people in the that are near the project and touching it, and maybe even in Carpinteria to embrace. We understand this isn't like a project that the city has maybe ever seen, and I appreciate that. That isn't lost on us. We recognize that there are people living around the perimeter of this that maybe looked at this and looked at the avocado groves to the north, and their expectation was that that would always be the way it was. And I think, you know, our point to that is we're trying to be good neighbors. We're trying to come up with a reasonable development. There's no easy housing solution out there that is going to have no impacts. Not to house the number of people that are needed in the South Coast region. Tough decisions need to be made. Compromises need to be made. This is a project that is not on agriculturally zoned land. It is residentially zoned and general plan. So I think that for us, we call it an infill project, an infill parcel, because there is other housing around us, and because the property is not agriculturally zoned. So is it infill in the construct that there is housing 100% around? It's not. And but it is a property that has been contemplated for development for decades. So again, it's not lost on us that this is a tough decision and a tough pill for some people to swallow. But we think this is good planning. A lot of people are clogged up on the 101 every day commuting in and out of Oxnard, Ventura, other places, and further trying to get in. And we think this is environmentally a good project because it takes people off the roads. It puts people that are working in the community near their work. And we think that's good planning. Valerie, could I go to the next slide, please?
Just really quickly, Brent, there's a comment in the chat that I wanted to cover before the chat moved on. And that was, today's rates. If you look at the rental rates for the workforce market rate development, if you look at rental rates in Ventura, Oxnard, as opposed to the city of Santa Barbara, that will give you an idea. This is too early for us to really set rental rates, but that's the benchmark that we'll be using. And then they talk about their homeless daughter becoming eligible for the housing, and we'll be doing outreach as soon as we're able to receive the entitlements. As you know, it takes some time to build. And so it's after receiving the entitlements and before the construction is done is when we do outreach to get folks, on the list for housing, particularly people experiencing homelessness, because it's sometimes hard to, keep track of them. And then how many homeless people are there in Carpinteria? The point in time count, the new one was just done last month. I don't have those numbers, but when I've been meeting with Dave and Steve over at the city of Carpinteria, there seems to be a core group of about 16-ish people that really closely identify with the city of Carpinteria, well known to all the residents who don't want to leave the city for housing, but hopefully would be willing to accept housing just outside the city limits. Anyway, sorry, Brent, go on.
Yeah, thank you. All good points. Thank you, John. So I wanted to share, and we've shared this with Supervisor Williams' office as well. He was very interested in, and one of the very first comments he made is he said, "I don't want this to be, high-end housing or second homes or anything like that." He wanted to know where we were modeling this and what we were looking at in terms of the workforce housing. So this is what we've shared in terms of how we're looking at the workforce housing. We said, where are people that are working now in this marketplace living? And Ventura, Oxnard generically, but other places, of course. And what are comparable rents that those people would pay for? So if given the opportunity to locate here at this site, they would be paying the same thing. That's our goal. And I just want to say before I move on this, that we spent almost 2 years reaching out to neighbors and working with the city on this, and we continue and will do the same as we go forward. We're not pushing away. We want to be engaged, whether you support the project or whether you oppose the project. But we're at the point now where we've made a significant amount of changes and offered them up, and frankly, we've gotten no response to every change we've made. It's how can we stop this project? And so at some point we say, okay, we've got to stop making changes and we've got to move forward because we're in this conundrum. So we're hopeful that those of you who are on the phone and who are listening to this and frustrated by the project will engage, if not for the reason that maybe we might be approved, and there might be some things that would make the project more more acceptable to you somewhere along the way. So that's just my plea to those of you that don't want to see it. Valerie, if I could go forward. So this is an example of the workforce housing that we have. It is designed to be workforce. These are units that are not intended to be on VRBO for people that want to come in and vacation in the community. Although if you do look at our amenities that we're proposing, it is an amenity-rich project. It does have a very nice pools and recreational facilities. So this is a typical 3-story apartment unit. So if I go to the last slide, So again, this is a little bit about the us and the Housing Authority. We have quite a few consultants, many of whom are local firms that are living, working in Santa Barbara County and are proud to have their name attached to the project. Lastly, I'm going to just appeal to your board for your support. I know this is a controversial project, and I know it's a difficult project, and we're asking you to make a difficult decision. But sometimes it takes a firm resolve to stand up for a difficult project that's needed. There needs to be housing in this county and in this area. There are not a lot of great locations. This is not ag, it's residentially zoned, and we'd really appreciate your support. And with that, John, Valerie, and I are happy to answer any questions that you have.
And Brent, let me start with just some of the things I'm seeing in the chat so that everybody has a chance. I thank you. Some people are very supportive and some have concerns. One individual asked about supportive services provided for the formerly homeless residents. And our typical things, we have case management on the site. So whoever they're already connected with, if it's behavioral wellness, if it's Path Point, if it's Path, whoever they're connected with, we ask to stay with the individual once they're housed. So that, because they have a really good idea of what the needs of the individual are to keep their housing, quite frankly, to retain their housing, which can be a struggle at times. Able to use the pool. We're working out where there will be agreements between us and Red Tail FPA so that residents who wish to utilize, most of the facilities will be open and no problem. The pool is one where we'll be going on a case-by-case basis and making sure that everybody understands what living in a community means. And that sometimes is something that is part of the conflict resolution that we do right up front. Talking about traffic and we're not being a good neighbor because we're putting folks in danger. Development is development. I mean, it does change. And quite frankly, keeping people unhoused is much more dangerous for the individuals themselves than housing people. Particularly considering that we will have, as we do in all of our properties, emergency plans. As I said, the resident manager who lives on site is our employee. We will have things in place to mitigate emergency situations, but it's vastly more dangerous to say we don't want to provide housing for people who are currently not housed because there may be a little bit of additional traffic or something. If you're concerned about the individuals, it's better to try to house them. We don't know about how many trees will be removed. We're not quite at that point yet, but the Housing Authority and Red Tail both, we try to work around mature, trees that are healthy as to the extent that we possibly can. Anyway, so sorry, there were a couple of things in the chat I thought would be of interest to others.
Well, Cindy, in the chat, I'm noticing she's very concerned about a different kind of safety, which is in the event of a disaster. Is this a problematic area in terms of people being able to get to safety from it? And does the project add to that problem?
From what we have seen in our preliminary analysis, there are a number of areas that have been subject to fires and debris flows and other concerns. So yeah, we will be looking at that. That's going to be part of the secret process that we've just really initiated. But there's housing in a number of areas in the county, and most of it market rate that are subject to debris flows and fires and flooding. But in this particular, there is relatively quick access to the 101. And I know that could be a bottleneck in those cases, but we will definitely be working with the community, with the neighbors on, emergency plans. Because I think that's one thing that we've come to realize in the coastal area is that we need to have emergency plans in place. One thing that I will mention is, though, that on the other hand, not housing people on the South Coast, particularly first responders, has led to some real problematic conditions with some of the disasters that we already have had, because they've been caught on the wrong side of a 101 closure in Ventura, Oxnard, Camarillo, and other places when they're very much needed at their jobs in Santa Barbara County. So it's like so many things. There are so many different things to weigh. But thank you, Dick.
Well, I think that's going to be, so you're saying, and I guess I'm feeling in my comments of people here from Carpinteria who are questioning the project, there still seems to be a lot of time for your input in this several stages of review. So the emergency issue seems to me one that really should be addressed. And the idea that first responders could be closer to the catastrophe if they lived there is how do we make sure that even happens?
Right.
Yeah, if I could jump in as well, and I know Christy, you just asked this, if there will be 2 access points, and yes, there will be. And we have showed this plan to fire, and preliminarily, while we don't have approvals, fire want the 2 access points, but outside of that, they did not have any concerns. And as some people that are not as familiar with the area may not realize, from the entrance to this project to the 101, it's less than 1,000 feet. So I know there's been a lot of challenges in the area with debris flows and fires and stuff like that. But we're not miles up the road. And I know I saw somebody else made the comment that the 101 closes often, or every once in a while when there's emergencies. That's a tougher issue to deal with. But in terms of our access to the 101, it's a pretty short window. I also wanted to respond to Catherine that asked about the trees, why the trees are tagged. The trees are tagged because we're currently doing a tree study. So our arborist went out and he assesses the health of the trees out there, and then they tag them.
All right. So, and I'm glad, I can speak for the SBCAN board, and several members are here. This has been very good for us, because we will be thinking about can we come to endorse this project. I would just comment personally to you, John, it's very admirable that you have been trying to figure out these partnerships in the absence of a really significant federal and state funding for full-on affordable housing. The partnership is a model that is better by far than the inclusionary efforts that people have been making. So, in principle, SBCAN is very positive about this kind of approach and the way this project is being carried forward, including the homeless service element to it. But if anyone, we'll try to monitor a bit what people in the community are saying and try to make sure we understand what the different sides are. So
Dick, I wonder if can I add one more thing that I think is a misunderstanding within the community.
Sure.
Because of the way the California Surplus Land Act is written, the Carpinteria Unified School District, in order to sell the property, has to offer it to a public agency first. And so this has been offered to housing. So even if it's not this housing project, it is going to be sold for an affordable housing project. And I don't know that the community really understands that that's how it works. If it was a private property owner, it would be a different process. but because of the California Surplus Land Act, there's a very specific and defined way that property has to be sold. So I just wanted to put that out there because I can understand people having concerns about what goes there, but the idea that it is going to remain an agricultural property that's zoned in a residential zoning, it's just doesn't seem feasible. I don't want to say it can't be done because I'm not an attorney, but the South California Surplus Land Act is very specific about housing, how Carpinteria can sell that, and the school district can't get the money that they need to support the general fund until this property is sold. So just offering that up.
It wasn't going to remain. It wasn't going to remain a farm if it was annexed into the city either. The city clearly was supportive of it being a school site. And when the city approached the housing authority, the discussion was for it to be an affordable housing project as well. So, you know, I certainly can't speak on the city's behalf. There's enough people on this call that can, but we can only judge by their actions, and their actions didn't indicate that they had any interest to save this property for agriculture either.
And Dick, I just wanted to bring up, you brought up a really good point about partnerships. This happens to be one of 3 partnerships with Redtail FPA. Development projects we're working on just on the south coast of Santa Barbara. And, you know, we're really excited about the opportunity, as you said, paying in lieu fees, where a market rate developer just pays in lieu fees may or may not result in affordable housing. Partnering, where you have a combination of market rate workforce oriented rental housing, which was important to us, and the affordable housing, that is really the way to go. And you are absolutely correct that that's the type of partnership that's going to be required to even try to address the housing situation that we have. Sarah had mentioned it here about, you know, Dignity Moves. Dignity Moves is great, and they provide a great service. But, you know, we're looking at permanent supportive housing as opposed to a more transitional housing model. And
Right.
Ultimately, that has to be the goal for people coming out of experiencing homelessness, has to be that permanent supportive housing to really get roots in, get comfortable, be in a safe and affordable environment, so that then the individual can move forward with taking care of whatever their other needs are to move on.
Very good.
With their lives.
I think before we end, Mayor Al Clark, would you like to make a comment on all this? You're muted. You're muted, Al. So
Thank you for the opportunity. I don't speak for the city of Carpinteria because that is the city council. I just speak for myself, and the city staff do not speak for the city of Carpinteria because that is the city council. But I feel this project has a number of potential impacts, and the benefits of the project, in my opinion, do not overweigh the pitfalls. And I think that one of the main problems is that we do have a huge affordable housing crisis, and it's primarily in the low income and very low income. And the Redtail project is an inclusionary project. It's at 20%. City of Carpinteria has an inclusionary level of 12%. So that is an improvement. However, the hole that we are in, especially for low income and very low income housing, calls for a much higher rate than this project is providing for that kind of housing. The more inclusionary housing we build, so if we want to get 100 of low income, very low income, moderate income units, we've got to build hundreds, even thousands of units altogether. And there's only so much land in this area. we could fill up all of Carpinteria Valley, have no agriculture, go up in the mountains, and we're still not going to conquer the problem. The best solution is to partner with outfits like People Self-Help Housing and build close to 100% affordable housing. Now, projects like that could offset some impacts of when you're crossing the urban-rural boundary and you're creating other impacts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know if you have any comment, John, to that point, because this is your bailiwick.
Yeah, thank you, Dick. Ordinarily, that's what the Housing Authority does as well. Most of the developments that we've worked on are 100% affordable. However, we were looking at a 7-acre site, and 7 acres of only affordable housing would not benefit the residents, would not benefit the community. We have to look at what the needs are at large. And we're very concerned about the needs of people experiencing homelessness, those who are low and extremely low, very low income. But we know there's also a need for workforce rental housing. And to isolate individuals on a site like this and say, okay, all the affordable housing goes on these 7 acres, and that frees up everything else for market rate, that doesn't benefit the individuals who need the affordable housing. The interaction that we've seen where we do developments within neighborhoods where the kids all go to school together and the adults all see each other at various times, the interaction, the learning from each other, people that are in the market rate units and people that are in the affordable units, that's extremely valuable to all sides. For people who have never experienced homelessness, to see and hear from people who have, and for people who have experienced homelessness, realize that there's a way to move forward, and certainly, with the kids involved. So, yeah, the vast majority of the developments we've done in my 27 years at the Housing Authority have been 100% affordable. But in this particular case, the need of the community, and in the other 2 cases, really is for a wide range of rental housing. Thank you, Dick.
All right, and with that, we've reached the 1:30 time limit that we try to set for ourselves. This is the whole session today has been a good example, I think, of the way in which citizen involvement in planning can be illustrated and encouraged. And the chat that we've created here should be saved by people because there's a lot of information there and a lot of issues. I'm really grateful to everyone who participated in this. And if you haven't understood what SBCAN is up to now, look us up online and join. Any final announcement before we sign off? Not comment, but just something that people should know about. So remember, the county board SBCAN website is listed now on chat. Thank you, Nadia. Okay, thanks everybody, and
thank you, everyone.
Keep your concerns engaged. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.